Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so this episode is the latter half of the fight with Clash and Talking Head, and it is very interesting how Narancia actually figures out a way to actually defeat these two enemies who are both united as enemies as well as lovers. And this episode just further confirms my point that they are in fact a gay couple, and that still makes me happy, even though they do ultimately get defeated at the end. But yeah, it does still make me happy that there's a gay couple in JoJo's. Even if they are villains and even if they are only in it for like an episode and a half, it does make me happy. But in any case, this episode opens up where the last one left off, where Giorno had successfully deduced that Narancia had Talking Head inside of him and was manipulating what he was saying to actually trick people into walking ambushes, but realized too late that there was another stand, and sure enough, Clash then proceeds to attack him and proceeds to drag him into the puddle on the floor, despite Narancia pointing out that there's not enough water there, and that seems to be another one of its abilities. That's in addition to being able to drag people into water. It can in addition to being able to teleport through water and burrow itself inside the water, despite the water only being a millimeter thick or so, and regardless of depth. Clash also has the ability to drag anybody else into the water, and Giorno quickly figures this out, and points out that he does feel very much like he should have expected a stand like this to actually come out and ambush them, and points out that there's two stands. And then at which point Narancia tries to fight back against Clash in order to get him back. And sure enough, it's at this point where Tiziano and Squalo actually have a bit of a back and forth as well, as they kind of gloat about their victory over Giorno so far. With Squalo kind of being happy about the fact that his Clash was able to actually grab Giorno and incapacitate him and make it so that and they basically lay out their plan, which is to take out Giorno first, since they know he can heal people. That's their plan. They know that since Giorno can heal people, they're taking him out first, and once they confirm that he is indeed dead, they're gonna go after the rest of the group and pick them off one by one, since now there's no Giorno to actually keep them all safe and happy and healthy. But it's at this point where Tiziano suggests to Squalo that he should kill Giorno as fast as possible, since, as he points out, and based on the intel that he was given from the boss, as he points out, Narancia is able to track people's breathing, and sure enough is able to find where it would be able to track Clash based on the fact that Giorno is currently breathing rather heavily because of the fact that he's been injured. And sure enough, Tiziano winds up being right, because Narancia immediately pulls out his radar and starts searching for Giorno so that he can actually find him. And he's having a hard time actually keeping on top of him, trying to figure out where he is. And sure enough, Clash keeps moving and jumping around various puddles that keep splashing along the room. And to make matters worse, every time Narancia misses a shot against Clash, he winds up creating more puddles and sending splatters everywhere, which only creates more places for Clash to hide. So yeah, Narancia is quickly finding out that he's in a bit of a bad state, and he needs to figure out how to get a hit on it. But he does, but slowly but surely, he does eventually start getting into a pattern of figuring out how fast Clash is actually moving, and realizing that since he's not going to be able to hit Clash if he waits for it, he's going to have to predict where Clash is actually moving to actually hit him. And sure enough, he does eventually get a handle on it and does eventually figure out where Clash is moving, and goes to shoot with Aerosmith, but he misses and winds up hitting Giorno and he then proclaims out loud that he didn't mean to hit Giorno at all. At which point Clash then proceeds to grab Giorno again and move. And sure enough, this actually winds up injuring Giorno to the point where he's unable to actually breathe. And sure enough, he notes that Giorno isn't able to breathe much anymore now that Clash has actually successfully dragged him under the water, and proceeds to drag him into the sewer. And Narancia very loudly declares that the enemy has fled. And sure enough, Squalo then proceeds to point out that now that they finished off now that they've actually wound up finishing off Giorno, they can successfully dispose of his body in the sewer. But then it's at this point where Tiziano suddenly gets a bad feeling because he then realizes that because of Talking Head, Narancia can only lie. And proceeds to explain this to Squalo. With Squalo pointing out that he feels like they can actually dispose of Narancia and dispose of Giorno, and Narancia isn't looking for them because he lost them. But in actuality, as Tiziano points out, he can only lie right now, and is using the fact that he can only lie right now to play mind games with Tiziano and Squalo to lower their guard. And sure enough, as we find out, Aerosmith's bullets, in addition to being able to shoot things, do have a secondary purpose in that they give off carbon dioxide wherever they're hit. So they also kind of act as tracer bullets, so that on the off chance Narancia is unable to find somebody, he can use his tracer bullets to find them that way. And sure enough, he does eventually find Clash and Giorno in the sewers, and manages to get a hit on Clash, which winds up injuring Squalo. And it's at this point where Squalo realizes he needs to get away from Aerosmith because now he's injured. As we find out, currently Bruno and the rest of the gang are actually trying to conduct their own research into how the stand actually moves, but they're hitting a bit of a roadblock because they're deciding to use Moody Blues to do it. And what Abaccio quickly points out is that Moody Blues can copy appearances and what an opponent does, but it can't really copy their movements if they're teleporting. So he quickly found out that his ability is just not working in that regard. But and Narancia, after seeing that display while he's running through the restaurant to try and figure out where Aerosmith is, where Squalo is moving, concludes that he is ultimately on his own and realizes that he's going to have to take down the enemy by himself if he wants to actually save Giorno and the others. Especially since they're not going to believe him anyway because of Talking Head. So, and sure enough, he does eventually trace the tracer bullets to deeper into the restaurant where the group is currently situated, and does eventually discover Clash and Giorno with Giorno's body in the fish tank where they keep all of their seafood. And sure enough, the reason Squalo did this, teleport to the fish tank, is because, as he points out, he's trying to kind of stop the wounds from actually leaking out carbon dioxide so that Narancia is no longer able to track him. But since they're bullets from a stand, that doesn't work, and they continue to give off carbon dioxide supernaturally. So at which point Squalo and Tiziano realize they need to lower Narancia into a place where he won't be able to track them, and they do eventually find a place and start teleporting, and Squalo starts teleporting his Clash to the kitchen. But by this point, Narancia has a pretty good handle on how Clash is actually moving, and does point out that he notes that while it is a long-range remote stand, it can't leap very far in between hiding places. So he does eventually start smashing up its various hiding places that it has less of a chance to jump. But Squalo does eventually succeed in getting into a pot in the kitchen, and at which point Narancia proceeds to shoot the pot and take it out. At which point Clash tries to retreat toward a bowl of soup, another bowl of soup, but Narancia smashes that as well, and Clash winds up being beached. At which point Narancia then proceeds to loudly point out that now the stand has nowhere left to run, and he proceeds to actually finish it off. But it's at this point where Clash actually decides to gloat through where Squalo through his Clash actually decides to gloat to Narancia, pointing out that he wandered right into his trap. As we find out, because Narancia shot the pots on the stove, he actually wound up putting out the fires on the stove, which causes a massive gas leak. And of course, this also means that now Narancia can no longer fire his bullets. But and declares that now that he's actually defeated Narancia and now he's no longer worried about Aerosmith. But Narancia barely points out that there's more than one ways for him to gut a fish, as the term goes, and quickly and proceeds to use Aerosmith's airplane blades to actually slice up Clash and winds up injuring him that way. And now somewhat immobilized, Clash is no longer able to move and is just forced to sit there. And it's at which point Narancia declares that the enemy is in the kitchen and tells everybody to hurry. But while this does ultimately cause the rest of the gang to hear Narancia's instructions and come find him, what we find out is that there's actually a bit of an interesting purpose here, which is that as we find out, Tiziano actually deliberately undid Talking Head. As we find out, Tiziano reveals that he can undo Talking Head to help to turn off its ability on and off at will to actually further deceive people and lure them into traps. And we actually do find out why he did this, because as we find out, sure enough, the rest of the group actually winds up running into the kitchen, sees Giorno on the floor surrounded by a puddle of water, sees Clash injured on the floor next to him, and Misa immediately pulls out his gun to go and fire, unaware that there's a gas leak and that actually firing his gun indoors will actually cause everything to burst into flames. And sure enough, and to make matters worse, Talking Head then kicks in again, and Narancia tells him to shoot. So, of course, he does exactly what Narancia tells him to do, even though Narancia is under the effect of an enemy stand, and everything goes up in flames. And to this point, and of course this causes everybody to momentarily become disoriented because there was now a giant fire explosion, and Narancia has no idea where he's actually going to go, where he's actually supposed to look for now, since obviously all the fire is causing carbon dioxide, which is interfering with his inability to track things with his sensor. So he has no idea where Clash actually is now, and Sure enough, Squalo then proceeds to gloat his victory before desummoning his Clash through a puddle of water, and as Narancia kind of laments over the fact that the enemies actually want up beating him, Giorno then proceeds to tell him to stop hunting the stand and start hunting the user. At which point he's then pulled under by Clash and drops one of his brooches. Narancia is very distraught about the fact that Giorno just got taken again, and to make matters worse, the rest of the group then proceeds to get annoyed, but he also points out that now that he can no longer track Clash, the rest of the group is actually going to wind up being attacked, and he winds up being right, but interestingly, Clash doesn't wind up hurting anybody too seriously. It just kind of slightly grazes them and then runs off. At which point, Narancia quick realizes that Clash is that Squalo and Tiziano are waiting to finish off Giorno before they go after anybody else, and since they're considering him a higher priority than anybody else, and in that regard, he realizes that what Giorno said is actually true, and that he needs and taking Giorno's advice to heart, he then realizes that if he isn't going to be able to track Clash anymore, he should try and find the user, since what he eventually figures out is that because Squalo is injured because of the fight during the fight with Aerosmith, he points out that he should be able to pick him up based on his labored breathing. So in that regard, he then proceeds to go outside with his sensor and start searching for Squalo that way. And also after picking up Giorno's brooch, which he then proceeds to take with him. And to this point, where Squalo eventually points out that Squalo and Tiziano eventually point out that now that they kind of gloat over their victory over Narancia, pointing out that now they've actually successfully beaten Giorno and Narancia, and they now no longer have an ability to track him. They ultimately point out that they've gloated their victory, but then they see Narancia running around in the streets below, and this is at this point where Squalo has a bit of a panic attack, because understandably he kind of realizes that Narancia must likely be looking for the two of them, and although Tiziano does his best to actually reassure Squalo that it's likely a last-ditch effort and he actually is going off of nothing, Squalo does point out exactly what he believes Narancia is doing. He knows Narancia knows he knows that Narancia injured him, and because of that, he's currently trying to find Squalo since he's trying to track him by his labored breathing. But Tiziano once again reassures him, pointing out that he's likely got nothing, and proceeds to wrap him up in a shawl and tells him that they'll get him to a hospital, and all he has to do is keep his cool and lean on him. So of course they can proceed to go down the stairs and actually go into the main streets where they actually see Narancia, and Narancia is still looking around for them. He hasn't quite found them yet, and Tiziano once again reassures Squalo to keep his cool, but it's at this point where Narancia declares that he found them, which of course causes Squalo to begin to panic again. But Tiziano reassures him, pointing out that obviously he knows that Narancia is lying, because he can only see the exact opposite of what he says due to talking heads. So because of he's saying the exact opposite of what he means, it means that he hasn't actually found him yet, and is actually just saying that. And though Narancia does declare it again, he does point out that it can't actually be possible, since he very much senses that talking head is still on Narancia's tongue. But it's at this point where he actually notices something with Narancia, which causes him to finally realize that what Squalo said might actually be true. And what we found out is that Narancia has actually cut out his own tongue with talking head on it, and of course this causes both Squalo and Tiziano to panic, because obviously they now realize that Narancia has actually surgically removed his own tongue with his knife, and even wonders how he's actually even able to talk despite that. But then they actually spy something strange in Narancia's mouth, and as we find out, Giorno, in a last-ditch effort to help Narancia and find the stand user, actually used his ability to turn the brooch he left behind into a makeshift tongue for Narancia. And while it doesn't really match the rest of his mouth, it does enable him to kind of rudimentally talk and articulate himself. And of course, and it's at this point where Narancia reveals what he was actually doing. As he points out, he now knows which ones are the stand users, because he reveals that while he does sense that while it is admitted in the episode that obviously Narancia isn't going to be able to track somebody by their labored breathing alone, since there's a lot of people moving around with labored breathing, because they're all exercising and a bunch of other things within a 100-mile radius, and of course he's not going to be able to track them all and pick out Squalo from the needle as a needle in a haystack. What he was ultimately waiting for was for somebody to notice that to see their stand, notice that it's no longer in Narancia's mouth, and then let out a sharp exhalation of breath in panic. And which of course is exactly what happened, because Squalo and Tiziano ultimately panicked when they saw talking head is removed from Narancia's mouth. And so at this point where Narancia ultimately concludes that Tiziano, who he calls the long-haired guy, is likely the stand user behind talking head, and declares that the person next to him that he's currently holding up is that he, by his own admission, looks a little bit pale. Is likely the person behind Clash, and of course they don't deny it, and Tiziano immediately points out that they need to get Clash out there now to actually deal with Narancia, but immediately comes into a problem, because as Squalo points out, while he can ultimately get him out of the canal where he's in Giorno's body, he does also point out that he's not going to be able to actually, get to Narancia, since there's no body as a water around. And sure enough, Narancia quickly realizes this and goes to fire at Squalo, only for Tiziano to immediately leap in front of him and take the fatal injury for him, and which also causes Narancia to be covered in Tiziano's blood. And Tiziano, with his dying breaths, declares that he's actually provided a body of water for a body of liquid for Squalo to actually teleport his Clash to, and tells him that while it didn't go according to plan, he does know that Squalo will ultimately be able to carry out their mission together that they started together, and take out Narancia and the rest of the group. At which point he dies and passes on in Squalo's arms. And Squalo, understandably upset over the death of his boyfriend, then proceeds to go into a rage and proceeds to teleport Clash to Narancia's cheek now that it's covered in Tiziano's blood, and declares that he's going to defeat Narancia and take out the rest of the group, but ultimately declares that he's no longer doing it on the boss's behalf. He's now doing it because he wants revenge for what happened to Tiziano. And of course, immediately Squalo attacks Narancia from the pool of blood gathering on his chest, and proceeds to bite into his neck and attack him. But Narancia, despite that, declares that he's not going to be defeated so easily, and proceeds to drive Aerosmith into Squalo's stomach and send him flying into the air before opening fire on him and finishing him off with complete with a stand cry. And as Tiziano falls to the ground, he then proceeds to wonder how despite the being going up against the boss, and despite being completely outmatched, and despite the fact that they should be full of fear right now, wonders why the group has so much hope. And sure enough, he passes out and collapses to the ground, which several of the people in the nearby vicinity mentioned, but nobody actually moves to go help. So, which I should mention is kind of a little messed up, but. Yeah, it's at this point where Narancia, having defeated both Clash and Talking Head, looks around does eventually collapse himself because he's taken a bit of an injury to his neck, but then discovers Giorno's somewhat lifeless body lying nearby, having been freed from Clash, and goes and calls out his name and goes to scoop him up, and discovers that he's still very much breathing, but he's a little worse for wear, but he's still very much breathing, and is very happy to see that Giorno is very safe and sound, and then proceeds to point out that despite the fact that he's not really their boss in any sort of capacity, he is kind of helping them go along and giving them hope, and in that regard does point out that despite what Abacchio has claimed, they do trust him quite a bit. He does point out that he has very much grown on the group, and is kind of sort of and does kind of feel like the kind of person that they want to follow despite not being their boss. So with that, he then proceeds to bring Giorno back to the rest of the group and tells them what happened, about how they were attacked by an enemy stand, and obviously since he's no longer under the effect of Talking Head, he can now talk freely. At which point, now that they're free to actually escape Venice, they proceed to get on Bruno's boat and eventually flee. And Bruno, now realizing that they're not going to be able to, pointing out that there's likely no more assassins nearby on land, declares that they're going to have to get off the land as quickly as possible, and proceeds to declare that they're going to need to rent a plane to do that, and points out that no matter what it costs, they're going to get to Sardinia, because that's where the boss's past lies, and if they can't get there and actually find out more about his past so that they can find a way to defeat him, they're going to be doomed. But in case that's where the episode ends, and I do kind of like how the episode ends. This episode just kind of does reaffirm that Squalo and Tiziano are in fact a couple, and that they do ultimately die in the end. It does make me happy that there is indeed a gay couple in JoJo's, even if it did take them a bit. But yeah, it does make me happy that was a thing. I am very happy about the fact that it is a thing, and yeah, that's gonna do it for my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. What did you guys think? Let's get discussing them in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that I'm always saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you guys want to see more perks from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!